She had no idea the man they forced her to marry was once the rightful heir to the company her stepmother now controlled. She thought he was just a poor gateman, another punishment for not being the favored daughter. But behind his quiet eyes was a man who had once had it all, and was now on a quiet mission to take it back. This emotional African folktale is packed with betrayal, redemption, and a powerful lesson about pride, power, and destiny. Now let's begin. The compound had grown quieter over the years. Since the death of Chief Bright, the house no longer felt like the symbol of pride it once was. Inside, the air was always tense, especially around Amarachi. She was in the kitchen, peeling yam that she was going to cook for breakfast, when she heard the bell ring. Madame Stella's voice followed immediately after. "Amarachi, someone is at the gate. Go and check." Amarachi wiped her hands and walked toward the entrance. The man standing there wasn't someone strange. It had been a while, but she recognized the face. Kelvin Okonkwo. He was the son of her late father's closest business partner. They had all been friends once. Their fathers had built a company together. As children, Kelvin used to visit with his father. He had been tall, neat, and confident. But now he stood before her with an old backpack and dust on his shoes. He looked tired. Amarachi opened the gate and greeted him quietly. "Good morning." Kelvin gave her a small smile. "Good morning. Is Madame Stella around?" She nodded and let him in. Inside, Madame Stella was seated on a brown leather chair, her legs crossed, a cup of hot tea beside her. She looked up with surprise when she saw him. "Ha! Kelvin?" He bowed slightly. "Yes, Ma. Good morning. What brings you here after all these years?" He took a deep breath. "I came to see you. I just got back into town. Things have been very hard since my father died. We lost everything. I've been trying to pick up the pieces." Madame Stella didn't say much. She just sipped her tea, studying him. "So what do you want from me?" "My father and your husband, they had a business together. Before things went bad, there was an agreement. A written one. I believe my father left his shares to me. I want to know if there's anything I can claim. Anything at all." At that point, Amarachi, still standing by the hallway, listened closely. Stella dropped her cup slowly and looked him square in the eye. "Yes, there was an agreement, but when your father went bankrupt, the company's shares were taken by creditors. I tried to hold on to them, but the court processes were out of my hands. Your father's debt swallowed everything." Kelvin looked down. "So, it's all gone?" "Yes," she said without blinking. "I'm sorry. Nothing is left for you." He paused, still calm but firmer this time. "That's not true, Ma. I know what the agreement said. A part of the agreement states that when I'm ripe for marriage, I would have to marry one of your daughters. If not, I would inherit 50% of the company." Madame Stella's smile tightened. Kelvin continued, "I'm not here to fight. I'm just trying to rebuild my life. I came here hoping I can get something from the company. At least I can start from there." Stella remained quiet for a moment. Then she stood, walked toward him slowly, and said, "Well then, we can settle this in a way that suits everyone. If the marriage part of the agreement will stop all these claims and drama, then I'll give you one of my daughters." Kelvin looked startled. "Marriage? Yes. Work and family. I'll give you a place to stay. You can work here as my gateman, and this is me being nice. We'll arrange the marriage later." Kelvin was speechless. That was not what he came for. He had thought maybe he'd get a small stake in the company, or at the very least something that could help him start fresh. He wasn't ready to be tied to a woman, not like this, and not when he still had nothing to offer. "I just wanted stability," he said quietly. "I wasn't looking for a wife." Stella's tone turned cold. "Well, you'll have to choose. You can either go out there with nothing or stay here with the opportunity I'm offering." He nodded slowly. She smiled politely. "You can stay in the boys' quarters. I'll let you know the next step." He left the sitting room that day with a tight knot in his chest. It felt wrong, but he had no other options. The streets had taught him that pride could wait. Later that evening, Madame Stella sat in her room with Jane, her only daughter. Jane was all she had, and she intended to keep her in the circle of the rich and powerful. She had a boyfriend, Charles, a real estate tycoon. "That boy came here today," Stella said casually. "Kelvin, Okonkwo's son." Jane rolled her eyes. "That broke one?" From prison? Yes. He asked about his father's shares. I told him they were gone. But then he reminded me about the agreement, the part that says if we don't give him one of you, he gets 50% of the company. Jane's brows raised. And what did you say? I offered him a job. And a wife. Jane dropped her phone. You offered me? Are you mad? Why would I waste your future on a boy with nothing? No. He'll marry Amarachi. Jane laughed hard. Perfect. Let her marry the gateman. That way, if anything ever happens, we'll say the agreement was fulfilled. Exactly. I've already planned everything. The marriage will be rushed. The two of them shared a knowing smile. The next morning, Amarachi was called to the sitting room. She came in quietly, wiping her wet hands on a rag. She had been washing the dishes. You'll be marrying Kelvin, Madame Stella said. Amarachi's hands froze. What? You heard me. That's your late father's friend's son. They had an agreement. He came asking for his rights. I've decided to give him a wife. Since Jane is already taken, and of course you're the first daughter, it'll have to be you. But, no buts. He's already staying in the boys' quarters. The marriage will happen. You'll help the family name. Amarachi stared at her stepsister. Jane didn't look surprised. She just crossed her legs and kept scrolling on her phone. You're sacrificing me. No, I'm fulfilling your father's legacy. You should be proud. Amarachi left the room quietly. She didn't cry, but deep inside, something cracked. That night, she sat on her bed staring at the ceiling. Everything about her life had been decided without her input. First, her mother's death, her father's death, then the constant mistreatment, now this. She had no choice. She had no power. But she would survive. Somehow, she would survive. The compound had the clean, polished look of upper-class taste. White painted walls, glass-paneled balcony rails, and spotless tiled floors in the driveway. The gate was sleek, automated, and swung open silently. Inside, everything looked well-maintained. The flowers were trimmed, the generator house neatly built, and the garden lights came on automatically at dusk. Since Kelvin started working as the gateman, the routine around the house settled into something quiet but new. He woke up by 6 a.m. sharp, swept the compound even though it barely needed it, and walked around the gate with an alertness that showed he took the job seriously. The boys' quarters where he stayed was decent. A one-room self-contained with a firm bed, working toilet, tiled floor, and clean windows. It wasn't luxurious like the main house, but it was comfortable. He mostly kept to himself. On his third day in the compound, Amarachi brought out a plate of food and placed it gently on a flat stool near the gate. He looked up, surprised. "Is this for me?" She nodded. "Yes." "Thank you." She stood there for a second, then said quietly, "I need to make something clear." Kelvin turned to face her. "I'm not going to marry you," she said calmly. "No offense, but this is not the kind of life I planned for myself." Kelvin didn't react immediately. He looked down at the plate of rice. Then he gave a small nod. "I understand," he replied. "And I don't want to marry you either." She blinked, slightly caught off guard by how calm and honest he sounded. "I didn't come here to marry anyone," he continued. "I came here to survive, to catch my breath. I've been through too much to start chasing after a woman." Amarachi crossed her arms. "Then why did you agree to the marriage?" "I didn't," he said. "Your mother said it was the only option available for me. I just didn't argue, because arguing would have made things worse. And right now, I don't have the strength." She nodded slowly. "Fair enough." There was a short silence between them. "I'm sorry they dragged you into this," Kelvin added. "Enjoy your food," she said, then turned and walked back inside. Days passed. Amarachi avoided him most of the time, but she wasn't rude. If he greeted her, she greeted back. She always brought him food. They didn't have conversations, but there was no tension either. Just a quiet, awkward distance. Kelvin spent most of his hours fixing things no one asked him to. He polished the gate, cleaned the entrance tiles after every rain, and made sure the garden taps weren't leaking. Even the dogs began to respond to him. Amarachi watched all this silently from her window. He didn't act like someone who was lazy or bitter. He moved like someone used to carrying burdens without complaint. Madame Stella, on the other hand, acted like he didn't exist. She only acknowledged him when she wanted to send him on errands. Sometimes she would call him into the sitting room just to give orders. One afternoon, Amarachi returned from the market and found Kelvin standing near the fountain, writing something in a small exercise book. She walked past him, then paused. "What are you always writing in that book?" He looked up. "Plans." "For what?" He shrugged. "My life, goals, and business ideas." She raised a brow. "Seriously?" He nodded. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "What kind of business?" "Logistics and delivery." "Something like that, but on a bigger scale. Motorbikes, vans, dispatch riders. A whole system." She was quiet for a while. "With what money?" He smiled a little. "None yet. But I'm not going to be a gateman forever." She studied him. This was the first time they were having a proper conversation since he arrived. And he wasn't sounding like someone who had accepted failure. His tone wasn't proud or boastful, just certain. "You talk like someone who still believes anything is possible." "I do," he said, "because if I don't, I'll lose what's left of my mind." She nodded slowly. Then she walked away. Kelvin spent the night reading an old business book he found in the store. He had written 3 pages of a delivery model plan earlier in the day and wanted to fine-tune it. He didn't know if Amarachi would ever look at him as anything more than the boy at the gate. But he wasn't going to wait for anyone to validate his dreams. He didn't come here to fall in love. He came to rebuild his life, with or without the woman they were forcing into it. Today's special hug goes out to Thembi Masuku from South Africa and Devon from Jamaica. Tell me where you are watching from in the comments so I can give you a special hug in my next story. Thank you. The marriage was fixed for a Wednesday morning. There was no long notice, no traditional ceremony, and no fanfare. Madame Stella simply called Amarachi to the living room 3 days before and dropped the news like it was a normal update. "You and Kelvin will sign your court papers next week. We've delayed it long enough." Amarachi stared at her, confused. "Wait, what? It's not up for debate," her mother said flatly. "You're already engaged, remember? We agreed." "No, you decided," Amarachi said. "I never agreed. If you think you can stay in this house and act like you're in charge, think again. You don't have a job. You don't have a plan. This is the best option you'll ever get. I can't just marry someone I don't. Your sister's wedding is in 2 weeks. You will not embarrass me." That night, Amarachi sat on her bed and cried, because she felt like everything she dreamed of had ended. Her plans of going back to school, getting a decent job, building her own life, it all felt like it had collapsed. Her stepmother had made her feel like a burden, like someone with no worth unless she was tied to a man. Everything made her cry. The court wedding happened quietly. They went in separate cars. Amarachi wore a modest dress, cream-colored, simple, nothing like a bridal outfit. Her expression was distant. When the official handed her the pen to sign, she looked at it like it was a chain. Kelvin signed too, without any dramatic pause. Afterward, they left the building in silence. There was no reception, no photo session. 2 weeks later, Jane married Charles in grand style. Gold and white hall decorations, a live band, small chops floating around like leaves, and guests snapping pictures with celebrities. Amarachi wasn't even put on the bridal train. She stood at the back of the hall, watching her younger sister dance in a dress worth millions. Jane smiled like she had won. That evening, while the last of the guests drove out, Amarachi brought out a flask and a cup and walked to the gate. "You haven't eaten," she said softly. Kelvin looked up, surprised. "Thanks," he replied. "I brought you jollof rice, with fried plantain and chicken." She handed it over. Their eyes met briefly. Something in her had softened. "I'm sorry they forced this on you," he said. She looked at him. "You've said that before. I know. I never thought my life would turn out like this." She nodded. "Same here." They sat quietly for a few moments. "I wanted to go back to school," she added. "I was supposed to finish my degree next year." He glanced at her. "What course?" "Economics." He smiled. "Good choice." "What about you? Did you finish school before going to prison?" "Yes. I studied business management at Babcock. The trouble started a year after my graduation. For the first time, Amarachi looked at him fully. "I thought," she shook her head, embarrassed. "I didn't know what to think." He nodded. "It's okay." In the days that followed, Amarachi started warming up to him. She brought him food daily, more than before. Sometimes sat with him while he ate. They talked about light things at first, the weather, how expensive foodstuff was, the noise from the neighbors. But slowly, the conversations deepened. She asked about his daily routines. He told her how he still wrote in his notebook. She laughed and called it Gateman's diary. He called her Madam Economist. He told her about his efforts to reach out to his father's old friends, especially a certain lawyer named Barrister Peter. "He was our family lawyer," Kelvin said one evening as they sat near the garden. "I called him recently. We're supposed to meet next week. You think he can help?" "He has to," Kelvin said. "I think the company was stolen from us. My father's shares just disappeared after my father died. He died a few months after I went to prison. And the worst part is, the barrister knew something was off. But he didn't say anything back then. Why? He was threatened. Someone warned him to keep quiet or lose his license. He told me all this recently. He said he kept silent, hoping that if I ever came out, I'd be able to fight." Amarachi stared at him. "That's a lot," Kelvin nodded. "But I'm not backing down. I need to know the truth. If they really stole everything from us, then I'll take it back." She looked at him differently that night. He didn't sound like a broken man anymore. He sounded like someone with direction, someone who still believed in something. That spark, that quiet fire, caught her attention. Maybe, just maybe, she hadn't made the worst mistake. And maybe this wasn't the end of her dreams, but the beginning of something she never expected. Meanwhile, Madame Stella remained focused on Jane's new life. Her daughter and Charles had traveled to Dubai for honeymoon. She posted pictures online every day. The caption on one read, "When God gives you double for your patience." The meeting with Barrister Peter happened on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. Kelvin left the house quietly without drawing any attention. Amarachi already knew where he was going. She had even helped him arrange the files the night before. It was no longer just his fight. She had taken interest in everything he was doing. The barrister's office was tucked away on the second floor of a commercial plaza in Ikeja, Lagos. The paint on the building was fading, but the signboard still held its ground: Peter and Partners, Legal Practitioners. The moment Barrister Peter saw Kelvin walk in, he stood up. "Kelvin," he said, almost breathless. "I didn't know I would see you again before I leave this earth." Kelvin gave a faint smile as he shook his hand. "It's been a while, sir." They didn't waste time. As soon as they locked the door, Kelvin brought out the documents he had gathered and placed them on the table. "I want to get back what was stolen," he said firmly. "Both my father's company and the shares he had in Chief Okonkwo's business, the one now controlled by his wife, Madame Stella." Peter sighed and leaned back. "I was hoping you'd come one day." He stood up, walked to a drawer, and brought out a brown envelope. "I've kept this for years. All the original agreements. Your father trusted me." Kelvin opened the documents carefully. Everything was there, stamped and signed. His father's shares, his role in both companies, the joint venture terms with Chief Okonkwo, and the marriage clause. The weight of betrayal sat heavy in the room. "I need to know," Kelvin asked. "Why didn't you fight this when everything happened?" Barrister Peter rubbed his forehead. "Because the men who hijacked your father's main company are powerful. They're the ones who came after me. Threatened my career, my family, even my life. They said if I spoke out, I'd be finished. So I stayed quiet." Kelvin clenched his jaw. "And the shares in Madame Stella's company?" "She lied to everyone," Peter said. "Told the board your father's estate was bankrupt. Claimed creditors took the shares. But that was never true. She used the chaos after your arrest and father's sudden death to quietly absorb the shares and bring in her own people. The board was reshaped with people loyal to her." Kelvin shook his head, struggling to keep calm. "I knew she was hiding something, but this. I didn't speak up then," the lawyer continued. "But I'm ready now. I kept every file, every receipt. We'll need to proceed carefully, especially with your father's original company. That one is messy. The men involved won't go down easily." Kelvin nodded slowly. "Then we go step by step." They outlined two parallel strategies. First, to file a motion to retrieve the original board minutes and financial transactions for both companies. Second, to prepare a legal petition exposing the fraud and manipulation used to transfer ownership. Peter also planned to request a court order freezing the contested shares if necessary. Back home, Kelvin shared the outcome with Amarachi as they sat together that evening. He laid the documents out on the table between them. "It's worse than I thought," he said. She listened quietly, her eyes scanning the files. "So everything your father worked for, they just stole it?" "Yes. And they buried the truth. But now you can fight back." Kelvin nodded. "I will. But I have to be smart about it, especially with the other company. The people in control now, they don't play clean." Amarachi reached for one of the folders. "We'll take it one step at a time. I'll help you however I can." He looked at her for a moment. She wasn't just being polite, she meant it. These past few weeks had changed something between them. The awkwardness was gone. They weren't just forced partners anymore. They were becoming a team. Meanwhile, in the main house, Madame Stella was growing uneasy. Kelvin was still performing his duties around the compound, opening the gate, keeping the surroundings tidy, and running errands. But his behavior had changed. He moved with purpose, spoke with confidence, and came home at regular hours with files tucked under his arm. She noticed Amarachi began spending more time in the service quarters. Sometimes she returned late in the evening, laughing or talking softly. At first, she thought it was just friendliness, but then she started wondering, were they bonding? One morning she casually brought it up during breakfast. "So, how's your husband?" she asked Amarachi, who was buttering bread. "He's fine," Amarachi replied calmly. "He seems busy these days," Madame Stella chipped in. "He is. What is he busy with? That's not your concern," Amarachi said, her voice even. Later that afternoon, Madame Stella took a walk to the service quarters. She knocked, and Kelvin opened the door. The room was neat, with a small shelf of books, a table full of documents, and a whiteboard filled with notes. "You're looking busy," she said. "I try to stay productive." She forced a smile. "What are you working on?" "Just personal matters," he said, his eyes not leaving hers. "You're not trying anything funny, are you?" He tilted his head slightly. "Nothing of your concern, Ma." "Well," she said, stepping back, "I hope you know your place. I've never forgotten it," he said, then closed the door gently. That night, as Amarachi brought him food, she said, "My stepmother is getting suspicious." "She should be," he replied. She smiled and sat beside him. "Let her guess. She's the one who underestimated you." 3 months passed. Quietly but deliberately, Kelvin moved his pieces. With Barrister Peter's help, he filed 2 legal petitions, one against the fraudulent takeover of his father's main company, and another demanding the return of the shares his father held in Madame Stella's firm. The strategy was clear. Strike hard, but only when every document and testimony was ready. Amarachi was there every step of the way. She helped him organize files, stayed up late editing reports, and even accompanied him to some meetings. Their bond deepened, no longer out of pity or circumstance. She had grown to respect him, and he, without saying too much, had come to value her deeply. When Madame Stella first got wind of the legal moves, her response was instant and harsh. She told them to leave her house that same day. "So you're dragging me to court?" "Good. Drag yourself out of my house, too," she said coldly. With nowhere to go, Kelvin called Barrister Peter in the middle of the night. The old man didn't hesitate. By the next morning, they had been moved into one of his quiet properties on the mainland, a simple bungalow, neat and secure. "Stay here," the barrister told them. "It's not much, but it's safe. Just focus on the case." The day of the court final hearing finally came. Kelvin wore a simple black suit. Amarachi, dressed in a modest blue gown, walked beside him into the courtroom, her hand lightly brushing his. Barrister Peter, older but with fire in his eyes, stood tall as they entered. Inside, Madame Stella sat on the opposite side with her lawyer, a loud man who had underestimated the young man standing across the room. As the proceedings began, the courtroom filled with whispers. Nobody expected the case to go far. They assumed Kelvin was just another desperate man with dreams too big for his pocket. But the evidence began to speak for itself. Barrister Peter presented signed documents, the original partnership agreements, the certified record of Kelvin's father's shares, and proof of the deceit that followed his death. Then came the bank statements, company audit reports, and most damning of all, a voice recording Peter had secretly made years ago when a representative of the rival firm threatened him. This the barrister said, holding the recorder in one hand, is what kept me silent all these years. But not anymore. Gasps filled the room. Madame Stella's face turned pale. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge was already reading through the signed documents with interest. It took 4 hours of argument, counter-argument, and document review before the judge made ruling. This court finds that Mr. Kelvin Okari is the rightful heir to his late father's company and holdings, the judge announced. The evidence presented confirms foul play, fraudulent takeover, and intentional misrepresentation by the parties involved. He paused, then continued firmly, effective immediately. Control of Okari & Sons Industrial Ltd. is to be returned to Mr. Kelvin. Additionally, the 30% stake in O&O Enterprises, currently under Madame Stella's administration, is to be restored to him in full. Furthermore, O&O Enterprises is hereby ordered to pay the sum of 10 billion naira to Mr. Kelvin in damages and compensation, or risk full forfeiture of the company to him. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Madame Stella looked as though the floor beneath her had vanished. She clutched her handbag tightly, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Kelvin didn't speak. He just nodded once and looked at Amarachi. She gave him a soft smile. Outside the courthouse, the media had already caught wind of the story. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Kelvin and Barrister Peter walked past them in silence. Amarachi followed closely behind, her heart pounding with mixed emotions, pride, relief, and something else she couldn't name yet. That evening, they sat outside the bungalow Barrister Peter had lent them. The sun was going down. The compound was quiet. But for the first time, it didn't feel temporary. "You did it," Amarachi said, handing him a cup of tea. "We did it," he replied. "You're now the owner of your father's company, and a major shareholder here. And 10 billion naira richer," she added, trying not to laugh. He nodded. "Feels strange, like waking up in someone else's life. I know the feeling." Kelvin turned to her. "I know I said I didn't want marriage. And honestly, when this all started, I meant it." "I didn't want it either," Amarachi said softly. "I wanted to finish school, live my own life. But here we are." They both laughed quietly. There was no pressure. Just peace. Meanwhile, in her own house, Madame Stella sat frozen. The news was all over the internet. Her face had been splashed across business blogs and local channels. Her phone rang non-stop. Shareholders wanted explanations. Board members were resigning. She paced her living room, sweating and furious. Where in the world was she going to get 10 billion naira to pay Kelvin? It had been 2 months since the court victory. Kelvin and Amarachi were settling into their new reality. A life that no longer involved sleeping in servant quarters or taking orders from people who looked down on them. The bungalow Barrister Peter gave them had become their first real home together. It wasn't just shelter, it was where Amarachi learned to trust again, and where Kelvin finally began to dream without fear. Every day was busy. Kelvin was already running his father's company, holding board meetings, hiring professionals, and undoing the damage that had been done over the years. He also began the process of negotiating the 10 billion naira payment from O&O Enterprises, a task that was being monitored closely by his legal team. Amarachi, on the other hand, had returned to her studies part-time and was also managing administrative work for Kelvin. They functioned like a unit, and everyone who met them could see it. Even though they rarely said much, their synergy was visible. Madame Stella, meanwhile, was losing her grip on everything. After the verdict, shareholders abandoned her. Her lawyer quit. Creditors came knocking. Even her expensive car was seized by a bank she owed. But what broke her completely wasn't the money. It was the day Jane walked into the house with tears in her eyes. "Charles has been arrested," she said quietly. Madame Stella sat up straight. "Arrested for what?" "For fraud. The Financial Crimes Commission picked him up this morning. They said something about money laundering. I don't even understand." "Jesus," Madame Stella whispered. "Where is he now? They said he's being held in Abuja. His family is acting like they don't know me." Madame Stella was helpless. She had no influence left. She could barely pay for her electricity bill, talk less of legal fees. The humiliation was complete. And then, one morning, she went to Kelvin's office. Her steps were slower now. She looked tired, drained, and worn out. She wasn't even allowed inside until Kelvin asked them to let her in. Kelvin received her in a small conference room. "Good morning," she greeted weakly. He nodded. Madam Stella, have a seat. She looked around, clearly unsettled by the fact that she was no longer in charge. I won't waste your time, she said. I need help. My daughter's husband is in custody. We have nothing left. Please. Kelvin didn't speak immediately. She continued, I know I was cruel. I know I lied. But I'm begging you, don't let us rot. At least help Jane. She's still your wife's sister. Kelvin leaned forward. You know, when I came to your house that day asking for help, I didn't come to beg. I came to remind you of an agreement your husband made with my father. You had a choice. You could have helped me and kept your dignity. But you chose to humiliate me, to use your power to oppress someone you thought would never rise. Madam Stella looked down, ashamed. But despite all that, he continued, we're not like you. My wife and I don't believe in revenge for the sake of it. She looked up quickly, hopeful. So, you'll help? He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he stood up. You can tell Jane to come by. Amaraki will speak with her. But you need to sit with yourself and ask how you got here. Because even if I clear your debts and help your daughter, you've already lost something more important than money, your integrity. Life went on. Kelvin expanded his company, started hiring young entrepreneurs, and invested in education programs for children from low-income backgrounds, a promise he had made to himself while life was dealing with him. He also took over O&O Enterprises, formerly headed by Madam Stella, but he retained her as a staff. Amarachi completed her studies and began working with a foundation that supported women who were denied opportunities due to forced marriages or family control. One evening, Kelvin and Amarachi stood on the balcony of their new home, a modest but beautiful duplex in Lekki. She smiled. You know what amazes me? What? That we started in someone else's boys' quarters. And now, we're not just free. We're whole, he turned to her. I didn't just gain a company. I gained a partner and I gained peace. They held hands quietly as the breeze brushed against their faces. Moral of the story: 1. Never look down on anyone. Tomorrow can shift power and fortune. 2. Lies may delay the truth, but they can never erase it. 3. True success comes not from revenge, but from patience, character, and resilience. Thank you for staying till the end. Please subscribe.